The air in the dining room was thick, suffocating. I knew the moment my father spoke, the fragile, self-made life I'd built was about to shatter. The crystal chandelier hummed overhead, casting a deceptive golden light on the mahogany table set for 40 guests, but all I saw was the cold, frantic red and blue light beginning to strobe through the window. My name is Astrid Jane Sterling, and I am a designer who built her own empire, but my powerful, respectable family had just sacrificed my integrity to cover up a $200,000 theft. The true outrage wasn't the fraud. It was realizing my own mother believed I wouldn't miss the money. This is the story of choosing integrity over bloodline and the devastating silence that followed. If you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own earned identity, you'll understand this story. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. My life was built on straight lines, clean, predictable, earned. I sat in my Chicago loft, the evening sun casting geometric shadows across the raw silk and linen samples for my next collection. At 29 Harbor Line Studio was my defiant masterpiece, my own apartment, my own career forged without a single handout from the Portland empire that bore my name. I was Astrid Jane Sterling, and unlike the rest of my family, every piece of success I claimed felt anchored by resilience and the fierce protection of personal freedom. It's a very American thing, I suppose, this pride in building something from nothing. And it's why my father, Max Sterling, always said I reminded him of himself. He built Sterling Construction from a pickup truck and a toolbox, but somewhere along the way, he became too proud of the gold plating and forgot about the foundation. The facade he maintained was the Sterling facade, and it was currently gearing up for its biggest performance, yet Max combined 40th wedding anniversary and 65th birthday party. An extravagant multi-day social summit where every smile would be measured and every anecdote polished. My mother, Vivian Sterling, the matriarch, orchestrated these events with the surgical precision of a general obsessed with maintaining the illusion of perfection and social standing. The rot in the foundation was my brother Curtis Sterling. 3 years older, breathtakingly charming, and chronically ambitious, he was the eternal golden child who never had to face a consequence. He'd burned through 3 business ventures, each failure buffered by a soft landing engineered by Vivian. While Mac respected my competence, he enabled Curtis's recklessness, and Vivian lived to serve her boy with big dreams. The first crack in the facade always started with Curtis. It happened a week before the planned gala. My phone rang. It was a Portland number. Astrid. Hey, he said, his voice too low, too soft, laced with a tremor I knew was carefully learned. Dad's not doing well. Really unwell. We might have to cancel the anniversary. Cancel? I'd just emailed Mac about the specialty champagne selection he insisted upon. Curtis pressed on, insisting Mac was gravely ill and demanding the party be shut down. It's best if you don't come this time, sis. I'll handle everything. The line went quiet. It didn't sit right. Mac wouldn't cancel his party, the culmination of months of planning, without calling me himself. It felt like a deliberate, desperate attempt at control. I called Mac back 2 minutes later. He answered on the second ring, his voice booming and full of life. Astrid, you're still coming, right? Wait until you see the setup. Your mother outdid herself. I hung up, my suspicion hardening into certainty. Curtis was lying. And the lie was heavy, a suffocating blanket meant to keep me away from whatever mess he was hiding. I packed a single efficient bag and booked the next flight home to Portland. Flying back, I felt a deep sense of foreboding, knowing I wasn't going home for a celebration. I was going to confront the rot beneath the surface. When I arrived, the Sterling house looked exactly the same, immaculate white siding hedges trimmed to military exactitude, and the faint, unsettling smell of pine candles Vivian always lit for guests. Vivian greeted me with a perfect, unnervingly flawless smile, and a hug that felt stiff, rehearsed. Curtis appeared behind her, grinning too wide, too bright. "Lucy, you made it," he said. but the greeting felt less like welcome and more like surprise. Something in his eyes flickered nervous, watchful. For the first time in my family's house, I felt like an outsider, an observer. The next morning at breakfast, Mac was cheerfully discussing a new deck project. He looked healthy, strong, nothing like the dying man Curtis had described. Curtis, sitting across the table, barely touched his food, scrolling frantically on his phone. When Mac stepped away to take a business call, Vivian leaned in, her voice dropping to a low warning. Astrid, let's not bring up work or money tonight. Okay, Curtis is under extreme stress. Stress from what, Mom? I asked. She hesitated just long enough for the lie to become visible. Figuring things out. Don't make tonight tense. That's when I noticed the tiny but crucial flaw in the facade. Vivian's nails, usually flawless gels, were chipped. It wasn't stress. It was consuming worry. Later that afternoon, while pretending to organize the place cards, I heard Curtis on the phone in the pantry. His voice was low, sharp, and frantic. No, I told you I'll pay it next week. I have it handled. Don't call me again. He hung up the moment he saw me. Business? I asked. He stuffed his phone into his pocket too quickly. Yeah, you wouldn't understand. When he left, I looked at the counter where he'd been standing. A thin stack of mail lay there, including several payment receipts neatly folded. One was addressed to Pacific Northwest Investment Trust, a firm that only handled Mac's corporate accounts, not Curtis's personal ones. My stomach twisted with a cold certainty. That evening, as the first guests began to arrive, a wave of polite laughter and expensive perfume, I slipped upstairs to my old room. The light from the hallway hit the screen of my phone, where an email alert waited. It was from my bank. Transfer confirmation, $200, $1,000 completed. I stared at the number, my heart hammering. The source account name scrolled just below the date: Sterling Family Contingency, Access A. J. Sterling. My hands went instantly cold. I hadn't used that contingency access since I was 20. I refreshed the page, pulling up the transaction details. The money had been received into the only remaining joint account tied to the contingency fund, an account I hadn't touched in a decade, but technically still shared with Curtis Sterling. He hadn't just lied, he hadn't just borrowed. He had meticulously used my name and access to steal $200,000 from the family safe and put it directly into his pocket. I knew exactly why he wanted the dinner canceled, and I knew the truth was about to detonate at the table. I spent the rest of the night tracing the digital footprints of the betrayal. My loft was my sanctuary of order. This childhood bedroom was now a surveillance hub. The glow of my phone screen painted the walls as I scrutinized the data of deceit. The pattern was too clean to be accidental: 3 small test payments executed over a 2-week period, followed by the enormous conclusive $200,000 transfer. All of it signed digitally in my name. I felt not just anger, but a cold, focused fury, a professional instinct kicking in. My business was built on meticulous records and ethical transactions. I knew how to follow a paper trail, even a digital one. This wasn't just a family argument. This was a case of sophisticated fraud. I switched from being an outraged sister to a strategic investigator, securing screenshots of every transaction and cross-referencing timestamps. At sunrise, I moved downstairs. Vivian was already in the kitchen making her coffee, humming that same unnervingly cheerful tune, acting as if nothing was wrong. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and lies. I placed my phone on the pristine marble counter. The $200,000, $1,000 transaction glowed in the low morning light. Mom, did you know about this? I asked quietly. She looked up, confusion melting instantly into panic. Know about what, honey? I turned the screen toward her. The sight of the sum broke her perfect composure. Her face tightened, then softened into a pleading mask. Astrid, please. Jason was in trouble. It was supposed to be temporary. He promised me he'd put it back before anyone noticed. It was a full confession and justification. My throat constricted. Before who noticed, Mom, Dad, or me? She glanced anxiously toward the hallway, terrified Mac might appear. You've always been so successful, honey. You built your own empire. You wouldn't miss it. Your brother needed help. That sentence was the cutting blow, landing harder than any slap. It wasn't just theft. It was the ultimate dismissal of my hard-won resilience. My independence was the reason they targeted me. I picked up my phone, my silence now a loaded weapon, and walked out before she could manage another word. I drove straight to the outskirts of town, to the small, cozy cafe owned by Mac's sister-in-law, Beatrice Bia Chen. Bea was the family's grounding wire, the only one who never played favorites and never tolerated theatrics. Her cafe smelled like comfort and honesty. When I laid out the facts, Bea didn't even flinch. I figured as much, she said, her expression grim. Curtis has been showing up here lately, paying for everything in cash, bragging about a game-changing investment deal he'd secured. She slid a discreet manila folder across the table, the physical proof I needed. Inside were receipts, a limited edition watch documentation for extravagant hotel bookings in Miami, and expensive tailor bills, all dated within days of the fraudulent transfer. Theft, waste, and monumental entitlement, the ledger of a collapse. My next call was to Lena Vasquez, my college roommate turned high-powered corporate lawyer. Her voice was sharp and professional. Astrid, this is textbook identity fraud. If Mac accuses you, you are legally compromised. You need the deep forensic data to clear your name fast. Lena guided me on how to request the non-public bank access logs, IP addresses, device metadata, the unassailable digital trace. Using my company's legal footing, I covertly secured the necessary data. The log was my final piece of the puzzle. The transaction originated from Curtis's personal IP address and device logged right there at the Sterling home. The conspiracy was undeniable. Lena urged immediate, quiet legal action. I refused. They chose to make this a secret under the roof of the Sterling name, I told her, my voice unnaturally calm. I want the truth to be the last thing we all share publicly. At his party. My mind was fixed on the confrontation tonight. I had transitioned from victim to architect. The only thing left was the setting. Back at the house, the air was vibrating with forced merriment. The tension was palpable only to the three of us who held the secret. I sat down at the vast mahogany dining table, resting my phone, my folder of absolute evidence beside my plate. Curtis was across from me, his smile too bright. Vivian kept shooting him small, rapid, nervous nods, a silent rhythm of complicity. Mac raised his glass, his voice loud and proud, toasting the strength and unity of the Sterling legacy. The laughter died down. Mac leaned forward, his napkin still in his hand, his eyes finding mine. His voice was calm, deliberate, a hammer blow disguised as a pleasant inquiry. Tell me, Astrid, the $200,000 I gave you, what did you do with it? I gently reached for my phone, my fingers finding the folder icon. The final act was beginning. The room froze solid. Forks hung suspended silver, catching the chandelier's light. My heart slammed once against my ribs, then settled into a low, terrifying drumbeat. I had their attention. I had to execute the hook perfectly. What money, Dad? I whispered, my voice calm, but penetrating the sudden heavy silence. If you sent me that kind of money, I assure you I would remember every cent. I never received it. Mac frowned, his brow furrowing with genuine confusion. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his banking app. I have the confirmation, Astrid. The wire transfer went out months ago. It was coded to your name, the same account you used for your seed business fund when you were 20. Vivian immediately rushed into the chaos, trying desperately to trigger the cover-up collapse. Robert, please, this is not the place for this. It's just a misunderstanding. We can talk about this later privately. Her perfect smile had shattered. Her panic was naked. Curtis, who had been tapping his thumb relentlessly, lunged into the conversation with a forced, loud laugh that died instantly. Come on, Dad, this is absurd. Astrid's got so much going on in Chicago, she probably just moved it to another investment and forgot. Right, sis. Mac's gaze snapped from me to Curtis. The accusation in his eyes was lethal. Forget $200,000, son. That's not pocket change. This is my legacy we are discussing. Curtis's smile faltered entirely. Vivian, desperate, tried the final pathetic intervention. "We can fix it, Robert. It's just a clerical error." Mac turned toward her, his confusion intensifying. "Fix what, Elaine? If my daughter didn't get the money, where did it go?" I knew the moment to strike had arrived. I ignored Vivian's pleas, ignoring the hushed murmurs from the peripheral guests. My eyes locked solely on Curtis, forcing him to meet my stare. "Fix what, Curtis?" I asked, cutting through Vivian's panicked chatter. "Fix the transfer you authorized using my digital key, or fix the fact that the money went straight into your pocket before being spent on an antique watch and a 3-day rental of a private jet." He froze, utterly and completely. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly green hue. Mac turned sharply back to me. "What in God's name are you talking about, Astrid?" I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and performed the presentation of evidence. My hands were steady now. The cold focus of the investigator had taken over. I slid the phone across the immaculate linen tablecloth toward Mac, zooming in on the critical screenshot. "Here, Dad. Every transaction log. Same timestamp. But the authorization device and IP log link directly to Curtis Sterling, logged from this address. Here are the receipts for the luxury items purchased the following day. It wasn't a mistake, Dad. It was a conspiracy." Max scrolled, his jaw going slack. The sight of the undeniable proof, the IP address matching his own home, the receipts confirming his son's reckless spending, was crushing. The emotional fallout was immediate and brutal. He looked from the screen to Curtis, then to Vivian, the ultimate betrayal registering. "Jason, you did this." Curtis stammered, his voice cracking. "Dad, please, it's not what you think. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back." "Borrowed?" Mac's voice rose sharp and cold, cutting through the heavy silence. "You forged your sister's access and stole her money." Vivian shot up from her chair, abandoning all social decorum. "Robert, stop yelling. He made a mistake." "A mistake?" Mac snapped, his eyes now blazing. "Elaine, you knew." She hesitated, tears welling up. "He was drowning in debt, Robert. I thought if Astrid never found out, no one would get hurt." I laughed, a sound so brittle and bitter it shocked me. "You thought I'd never find out. You signed my name. You let him take everything I've earned. You let him sit here and watch me get humiliated for something you did." The wave of outrage broke over me. "You sacrificed my integrity for his entitlement." Curtis stood up, his hands trembling. "I was desperate, Astrid. I didn't mean to ruin anything. Desperate enough to let Dad accuse me of theft." My voice broke, but I powered through the pain. "You sat there and watched me get humiliated for something you did." Mac turned from his son to his wife, seeing the full extent of the conspiracy confirmed. "You two planned this." "Robert, please," Vivian whispered, sobbing. "It was for our family." He slammed his hand against the table, the impact rattling the crystal and silver. "No, Elaine, family doesn't lie. Family doesn't steal." Curtis shrank back, defeated. "Dad, don't do this. We can fix it." "You're right," Max said, pulling out his phone. "We can." He dialed without hesitation, a look of profound, devastating finality settling on his face. The price of justice was coming due. "Yes." He spoke into the phone, his voice steadying. "I need to report a theft. Identity fraud and unauthorized transfer of funds. $200,000, $1,000. Vivian's scream was instant, high-pitched and raw. "Robert, stop. Don't do this to him." He didn't even look at her. He did this to himself. Curtis sank back into his chair, his hands clamped over his face, as the red and blue lights of the police cars began to strobe through the dining room windows, a cold, frantic gathering storm. The room was bathed in the sickening rotation of red and blue light pouring through the dining room windows, the harsh external reality crashing into the Sterling family's gilded performance. The chandelier's soft gold light was erased by the intrusive glare of the police flashlights. The room, which had minutes ago felt grand, now felt small and colorless. This was the moment of the arrest, raw and inevitable. The police officers were professional and clipped. They asked Curtis to stand, citing the unauthorized transfer of funds and identity fraud. He didn't fight. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, his face a mask of utter defeat. Vivian's reaction was pure hysterical heartbreak. She wasn't the poised matriarch anymore. She was simply a desperate mother. She begged, sobbing, clutching Curtis's arms, shouting fragmented promises that had no legal weight and offered no emotional comfort. Curtis refused to meet her eyes or anyone's. He had nothing left to say. Mac remained an anchor of frozen grief. He walked over to the officers and signed the statement without a single word of hesitation. His hand was steady, betraying the pain that was visibly carving new lines onto his face. He was sacrificing his son to uphold the one thing he truly valued: integrity. The officers led Curtis out of the dining room. Vivian followed, her raw, guttural cries fading down the long driveway, echoing promises of lawyers and bail that no one, least of all me, believed would fix the fundamental damage. The front door slammed shut, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt physical. This was the post-mortem silence. Aunt B, always steady, came over and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "You did the only thing you could," she whispered. I looked down at the table, a landscape of scattered silver and spilled wine, and then at my father. His pride was gone, replaced by devastation. "Lucy," he said, his voice rough, thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I believed their lie. I believed the thief over the honest woman." I shook my head, already beyond the need for validation. I was operating on cold truth. "You believed what they told you, Dad. You had every reason to. But I had to protect it." I pulled my hand away gently. "You wanted to know what I did with your money. I protected it from them. I protected your legacy." That single act, the public execution of the truth, had shifted the entire foundation. The following morning, the reality of the rewriting of the future began. I found Mac in his home office. The desk, once a monument to his construction blueprints, was buried under legal documents. He looked at me no longer as a daughter, but as a colleague he trusted implicitly. "It's done," he said, his voice low and conclusive. "I've rewritten the will. The company, the house, every single asset of Sterling Construction, it's yours. The entire Sterling legacy was designated to pass to me. They'll get nothing." I started to argue it was too much, too absolute. But he cut me off. "It's not revenge, Astrid. It's recognition. You have the resilience and the integrity to run this, to respect what I built. They chose dishonesty. This is the only way to ensure the Sterling name survives." It was the official transfer of agency and power. Over the next few weeks, the consequences of the slow price of greed became public. Curtis avoided jail through a plea deal orchestrated by Mac's lawyers, but the restitution order was massive and non-negotiable. He had to pay back every cent. I heard from B about the sales. Curtis sold the car, the collector's watch, and even the expensive designer furniture Vivian had always bragged about. They moved out of the Sterling home and into a small rented duplex on the edge of town, a complete exile from their society. By the end of the month, the drama was a matter of public record, fading into the local gossip channels. It was time for me to go. Mac helped me load my bags into the trunk of my car. The sky was gray, a soft, misty rain coating the driveway. The silence between us was heavy but honest, cleansed by the brutal truth. He handed me one final sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $800,000. The original amount, he said quietly, his eyes focused on the check, not on me. "The money I meant to invest in your future before any of this happened. You deserve your clean start, Astrid. Go build something you're proud of." I got into my car and drove north. As the city lights of Portland disappeared in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel peace but clarity. The money was a cold, hard reminder that the cost of betrayal is sometimes paid in cash, but the reward is paid in freedom. I had survived, and I was driving toward a life that was completely and irrevocably my own. 6 months later, the scent of expensive coffee and fresh paint replaced the sickly sweet smell of my mother's pine candles. The narrative of my life had decisively shifted. I stood in the expanded sunlit space of my Chicago flagship boutique Harborline studio, observing the transformation. The $800,000 Mac had given me the true, untainted inheritance, had been invested not in reckless ventures, but in the foundation I had already built. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. This space, with its racks of tailored jackets and silk scarves, was my quiet act of reclamation. Every sale, every satisfied client was proof that my success was my own, and entirely beyond the grasp of the manipulative hands that once tried to claim it. This was the realization of true personal freedom. The frantic pace of Portland's high-stakes emotional economy had been replaced by the honest, steady rhythm of my own business. The headlines about the Sterling family drama had long since faded from the society pages. The painful whispers had been replaced by the quiet, focused energy of creativity and commerce. I checked the studio ledger, a habit born of necessity and maintained by professionalism. The mechanical reminder of the past was there. A small fractional payment had arrived sent by Curtis's lawyer. It was one of the scheduled installments of the restitution order. The payment was cold, bureaucratic, and utterly devoid of emotional power. It was simply data reminding me what greed costs. I was now so far removed from the betrayal that even the sight of his name evoked no surge of anger, only a detached acceptance of his consequence. Mac visits Chicago sometimes. He doesn't call first. He just appears bringing a specific local coffee and a briefcase full of company reports he no longer needs to review. We talk about fabric sourcing and sustainable design, not finance or family trauma. His smile, the one he gives me now, is genuine, the proud half-smile from my childhood finally cleansed of the anxiety and pretense of his old life. He's healthier, happier, and liberated from the burden of enabling. I maintain strict zero-contact boundaries with the other two. B provides the occasional neutral update. Curtis is working a low-level job in logistics, his debt a crushing yoke. Vivian, I hear, is volunteering at a local charity, the fire and meticulous obsession with external perfection replaced by a kind of hollow resignation. The obsession with appearance had finally been broken by reality. As evening fell, I stayed late locking up the shop. I looked out at the vibrant neon glow of downtown Seattle, the city I had chosen, the city that accepted me for my actions, not my name. I thought about the anniversary dinner, the heavy silence after Mac made that call, and the moment the red and blue lights sliced through the perfect Sterling dining room. The final reflection on my journey led to a quiet truth. The betrayal hadn't been the end of me. It had been the catalyst. The lie forced me to stop being the dutiful, passive daughter and to become a cold, calculating investigator, proving my resilience and integrity, not just to my father, but to myself. I had faced the absolute worst of familial love, the kind that enables and sacrifices, and I had chosen the harder, but ultimately more freeing path of truth. I am now whole. The heavy weight of the inherited name and the family drama is gone. The ultimate victory wasn't the arrest or the money, but the silence, the emotional freedom achieved when you choose truth over the comfortable, gilded lie. Betrayal didn't destroy me. It sharpened me. I am defined by my work, my choices, and my hard-won clarity. I closed the final lock, the click echoing in the stillness, and walked out into my own night, independent and unburdened. With the heavy chapter of the Sterling family closed, Astrid Jane found the clarity she'd paid for in betrayal and truth. What was the hardest choice Astrid made in reclaiming her life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one of your perspectives. If you demand more cinematic tales of justice and revenge, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.